Hi everybody, it's Mr. Westner. We're back today to continue the story of I Survived the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863 by Lauren Tarshish. Today we're covering chapters 7, 8, and 9. Chapter 7. The men scrambled to fold up their tents, pack up their knapsacks, and fill their canteens at the stream. Already they were grumbling about the heat. Bertie skipped around as if she was getting ready to go to a party. Thomas helped Les ready the horses for the trip, keeping his ears pricked up as he worked. A person learned by listening. That's what Clement always said. Sure enough, Thomas had learned more in the past 2 weeks than he'd learned in the past 2 years. The men were always talking about their families and their sweethearts, their hometowns, and their plans for getting back home. And of course, they talked about the war. It turned out what Clement said was right. People in the North did think slavery was evil. It had been illegal in the North for years. Now, President Lincoln wanted to end slavery everywhere in America. Except the people in the South didn't care what President Lincoln thought. They wanted to keep their slaves. 11 southern states were already trying to break away from the United States to start their own country. A country with slavery. Here's what Thomas had figured out. If the North won the war, the states would stay together, and slavery would be gone forever. And if the South won, Thomas tried not to think about that. But listening to the men each night, it was hard not to worry. The North had more soldiers and better weapons and uniforms, but the rebel fighters were fierce. Even though some fought barefoot with rickety guns that could barely shoot. They had a ferocious battle cry, the rebel yell, that they screamed out when they were charging. It sounds like you're being attacked by a pack of wild beasts, Henry had told him. The sound will chill you right to your bones. And now Thomas could see how worried the men looked as they packed up the camp. Thomas overheard Les and Homer talking behind the supply wagons. He didn't mean to spy, but they were talking in loud voices. This is going to be another Fredericksburg, Lester said. I can feel it. Don't say that, Les. Don't even think it, Homer said. Later, Thomas asked Henry about what he'd heard. Henry didn't answer right away. Fredericksburg was a big battle we fought, he said, back in December. What happened there? Henry looked into his knapsack, rummaging around as though he might find the answer folded up with his blanket. But then he dropped his pack and sat down. He patted the grass next to him, and Thomas sat too. Henry's face got a faraway look, and then, in a low voice, Henry told the story of that day. Chapter 8. We were told it was to be a surprise attack, Henry began. Tens of thousands of Union troops were to march to a town in Virginia, Fredericksburg. We would attack the rebels, take the town, and then march south to capture Richmond, Virginia's capital. Henry explained that the Union needed a victory badly, that people up north were losing faith in their army and their generals. It seemed like we were sure to win in Fredericksburg. Except that the rebels knew exactly what the Union was planning, and they were ready. Henry said that the rebels had a brilliant commander, the General Robert E. Lee. Somehow he always figured out where the Union Army was going to be and how they planned to attack. Sure enough, he had figured out the Union planned to attack Fredericksburg. He sent thousands of soldiers into the hills above the town, Henry said. He also sent dozens of cannons into the hills. Thomas knew that both sides had these mighty weapons, which were so heavy they had to be pulled by horses, and so powerful they needed at least 4 men to operate them. Some of the big guns shot cannonballs that were even heavier than Thomas. Others shot shells, explosives that were filled with razor-sharp metal strips, nails, and metal balls. Just one exploding shell could kill 10 men in seconds. The rebels had the high ground, Henry explained. Anyone trying to get near those hills was going to get mowed down. That's exactly what happened. Henry described how the 1st Union Regiment attacked. how lines of soldiers went charging across a field toward the hills. "They didn't even get close," he said. Kaboom! 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 Rebel cannons thundered hundreds of blasts every minute, and with every blast, Union soldiers fell. Men who managed to survive the artillery blasts were met with a storm of bullets. Within minutes, there were hundreds of our men lying dead and wounded in the mud, Henry said. But the Union generals wouldn't admit that their plan was a failure. They sent more regiments out to attack, and every time was the same. Kaboom! 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 More soldiers dead or wounded, their bodies bleeding and shattered. And then it was our turn, Henry said. Henry's regiment lined up and started charging toward the hills. There was so much smoke, we could barely see, he said. There were bodies everywhere. Halfway through the charge, Henry's legs seemed to get stuck between two rocks. He pulled, but it wouldn't come loose. As the smoke cleared, he saw that it was a fallen Union soldier who had taken hold of his boot, clutching it with all of his might. Henry thought the man wanted help, but he didn't, Henry said. He knew he was dying. He was trying to stop me from running into that death trap. Cannons exploded with their deadly fire. Men fell like stalks of corn cut down by invisible blades. Henry managed to crawl off the field. Other men weren't as lucky. 156 of our men died that day, he said. Over 200 more were wounded. 4 more regiments were sent in before the generals finally ordered the Union Army to retreat. In all, more than 12,000 soldiers were killed or wounded in Fredericksburg. Henry looked at Thomas now. Our men are worried, he said. This is our first fight since Fredericksburg, and we need to win it. All around Thomas, men were lining up to march, their faces grim and scared. Something terrible was coming. Thomas could feel it too. Chapter 9, July 2nd, 1863, the route to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. They marched 2 by 2 along the dusty road, camping at night and then setting out again before dawn. The days were scorching hot, and some men had collapsed on the side of the road, their faces beet red, their wool uniforms soaked in sweat. Bertie rode in the wagon with Les and Homer. But Thomas marched with Henry. Henry told stories as they walked about his parents and the store they owned, how his town smelled like apples in the fall, about his sweetheart Mary. He had shown Thomas and Bertie a picture of Mary, a pretty and serious-looking girl with a thick brown braid. They were both teachers at a little school in their town. Henry had also shown them his most precious possession, a small book Mary had made for him. It had a tin cover and was filled with paintings of their town in Vermont. In one of the pictures, the trees and grass were covered with what looked like a thick white blanket. That's snow, Henry had explained. It comes from the sky, like tiny icy flowers. There's nothing more beautiful than the first snow in Vermont. Bertie had closed her eyes and smiled as if she could see it all in her imagination. You have to realize Bertie and Thomas, being from the South, had never seen snow before. Thomas wished he could, but it seemed his mind had stopped making happy pictures when Clem was taken. I told Mary all about you, Henry said now, in my last letter. You wrote about me? Thomas said, trying not to smile. Hearing that made him feel important. One day you'll be able to write your own letters, Henry said. Thomas wondered if Henry was right. He hadn't learned how to read or write. Teaching a slave to read was illegal all over the South. Clem knew how to read, Thomas said. Henry always liked hearing about Clem. How did he manage to learn? Henry asked. One winter, one of Mr. Knox's sons got sick, Thomas said. So Mrs. Knox gave him lessons at home. Clem would sneak up to the house and stand on a bucket outside the window so he could hear. That's clever, Henry said with a laugh. Thomas remembered how Clem would stay up late into the night. He'd burn a candle so he could practice scratching letters into the dirt, he told Henry. Some mornings, Thomas woke up and the entire floor of their shack was covered with words, as though Clem had spelled out all of his dreams. But then Mr. Knox caught him. He noticed that Clem wasn't in the fields when he was supposed to be, and he found him up at the house, his ear close to the window. He saw all the words written in the dirt. What did he do? Thomas glanced at Henry. He hadn't meant to tell this part. He tried never to think about it. He whipped him. Thomas closed his eyes, trying to stop the flood of memories. The thwack of Mr. Knox's whip, Clem's shouts of pain, the sight of Clem's blood-soaked shirt. Clem couldn't walk for 2 weeks. For learning to read? Henry said, his eyes blazing with anger and shock. Yes, sir, Thomas said. They marched quietly for a moment, and then Henry turned. He put his hand on Thomas's arm. There are bad people in the world, he said, too many to count, but there are good people too. I know that, Thomas said, looking around at all the men. He had found that out over these past 2 weeks. Henry seemed to have more to say, but 2 soldiers appeared on horseback with a message for Captain Campbell. Tens of thousands of troops were already in Gettysburg. The battle had begun. This is it, the captain bellowed. To Gettysburg! The men raised their rifles and cheered along, but their eyes looked uncertain. Their words seemed to disappear quickly into the air like dust. They just started marching again when Henry suddenly turned to Thomas. I've been thinking, he said, that when all this is over, you and Bertie should come live in Vermont. You could go to my school. Mary is a wonderful teacher. She'll have you both reading in no time. Him and Bertie in Vermont with Henry going to school? Well, what do you think? Thomas smiled, too stunned to speak at first. And then the soldier marching in front of them fell to the ground. He landed on his back, his eyes gazing blankly up at the sky. There was a mark on the man's forehead, like a wormhole in an apple, only bigger. Blood poured from the hole, making a puddle around his head. The man had been shot dead. It's a tough cliffhanger to end on, but we'll continue reading this story when we get back together. And I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I hope you're enjoying learning about Thomas and Henry and Bertie and how the Civil War was unfolding. In the next chapters, we will actually go to the Battle of Gettysburg as it is occurring. So I will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.